Hi, welcome to School and Society Week 3. We're going to be talking about educational policy making this week. So we've talked about what schools should do and be, and what the various purposes of education are in a liberal democracy. And this week we're talking about control over educational policy making. So our two questions for this week are, who controls school policy, and how are decisions about schooling made? The texts that we're using to talk through this are Joel Spring, Chapter 9, and the New York Times debate series, Should Parents Control What Kids Learn at School? And you're required to just choose 4 different positions that you were interested in reading. I want to do a brief overview of where educational laws come from, just so we're clear. So our right to education comes from state constitutions, which set up educational systems, and they can't contradict the federal, like the US Constitution. They can't curtail rights that are established under federal law. So as long as they don't do that, they're pretty okay, right? Federal and state statutes are generally written in line with constitutions and are the way that the state legislature in different states executes its power. Regulations are created by agencies and departments. So in the state of Illinois, we have the Illinois State Board of Education, and there are also other professional organizations that create different kinds of regulations that influence schooling. And then common law is created by courts, and laws developed through court decisions, through legal precedent. And those all together, all of this really shapes what happens in school and where educational law comes from. In the state of Illinois, your right to education is established in the Constitution in 1870, which was then actually revised in the 1970s. And this is from the Illinois State Constitution. So it says, a fundamental goal of the people of the state is the educational development of all persons to the limits of their capacities. The state shall provide an efficient system of high-quality public educational institutions and services. Education in public schools through the secondary level shall be free. There may be such other free education as the General Assembly provides by law. The state has the primary responsibility for financing the system of public education. And that's really remarkable for a few reasons. One, it sets up the idea that the state is responsible for paying for education and that education through the secondary level should be free. And that's a pretty powerful and important thing that we believe we have a right to in the United States. Another piece that's interesting about this is the line, the limits of their capacities, and we'll talk more about that when we talk about disability and educational opportunity. But this Illinois State Constitution is not saying that everyone is entitled to the same education. It's actually saying that everyone is entitled to an education that is within the limits of their capacities. And you can see how that language might get massaged or perverted over time. And if we look at the Illinois State Board of Education, or ISB, which gives us a mission and vision, this is another governing body that is establishing, at least in the state of Illinois, curriculum, teacher licensure. So it affects, at least at Knox, the way in which we go about as an institution licensing teachers. And I think that it's important to think through the mission and vision and the goals to sort of get a sense of how a state board of education establishes an agenda and establishes its right to pass certain kinds of laws. So the vision and mission that Illinois ISB, the State Board of Education, has for the people of Illinois are that each and every child is equipped to make meaningful contributions to society and live life to its fullest potential. And the mission of the State Board of Education is to provide each child with safe and healthy learning conditions, great educators, and equitable opportunities. And here's where we get into the policy wonk part. By practicing data-informed stewardship of resources and policy development, all done in partnership with educators, families, and stakeholders. And I'll post this online so that you can read through the goals. And I'm just trying to go through the different kind of scales that influence education in Illinois, for example. And if you live in a different state, or if you are from a different country, you can probably look up this. Either your state board of education, or if you're in another country, the Ministry of Education for that country will also have all this information. District 205, so if we're kind of scaling down from like the federal to the state to the local, has its own mission and vision. And in addition to that, it has a list of what it calls instructional beliefs. Some of the instructional beliefs that it puts forward are that instruction must be relevant, it should be based on high expectations, it should be conducted in a climate that fosters and encourages educational risk-taking, and that students have the right to a classroom environment conducive to learning. You can read through this at a different point. I will post this online, or you could go to District 205 website. So in thinking through these multiple levels and the places where people make decisions, I want to start with the federal influence over education. And this is really from Joel Spring, chapter 9. He talks about federal influence. My question here is, how does the federal government intervene in the educational policy-making decisions? The educational policy decision-making process. Sorry, that was complicated. So primarily through categorical aid, which means that it's aid intended for a particular program, and that's generally how the federal government is involved in education. It's hard because once states accept money, they have to play by the rules, but they need the money to be able to deliver their instructional programming. There's a great chart on page 251 in the Spring book that shows the different ways in which the different influences and kind of the arrows and directions of influence. This really the federal government really began to be involved in public education in the mid-20th century with the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, ESEA, and it was part of Lyndon Johnson's Great Society and War on Poverty. It was the first time that the federal government prioritized education through spending in a broad way that was based on prioritizing groups that had previously been not allowed the same opportunity. So out of this time period comes Title I, which is a program that provides supplemental funds to school districts with the highest student concentrations of poverty. You have Title IX that comes out of this moment. So this forbids discrimination on the basis of sex. And the way that the federal government is able to influence school policy on the state and local level is through this carrot stick approach. So by taking money from the federal government sort of bakes in anti-discrimination objectives. So it helps enforce civil rights law. It attaches requirements to funding. So ESEA, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, actually eventually becomes No Child Left Behind, NCLB. People really like all the acronyms, right? And it has been reauthorized and rebranded by every president since Lyndon Johnson. So No Child Left Behind was George Bush's 2001 take on the policy. And standardized testing was added as a mechanism of charting school performance because the emphasis was on accountability. It was really the first time that scores had to be disaggregated by subgroup. And it actually held the promise of really being able to target school improvement. So once people had the data that looked at subgroup, and when I say subgroup, I mean race and ethnicity, language, English proficiency, disability, gender, national origin. So having all of that data in theory is a good thing because it allows you to see, wow, people might be proficient at my school, but if I break it down by subgroup, different groups of people are not getting the same quality of education. And basically at this particular moment, schools had to meet adequate yearly progress, which was a score cutoff for the percentage of students proficient in reading and math. NCLB was reauthorized by President Obama as the Every Student Succeeds Act. And in addition to ESSA, right, Obama signed Race to the Top, which was a 2008 stimulus package. It was part of a stimulus package that aimed to have schools compete for extra funding, provided that they came up with plans for adopting standards, that they turn around low-achieving schools, and that they focus on making gains in student achievement. Obama was trying to incentivize school improvement through making money available to states that followed a certain set of rules. So that's, again, in thinking about attaching requirements to funding, making states kind of be on the same page through saying, hey, you can have this money or you can have this funding, but only if you do X, Y, Z. The second sort of piece that I'll be talking about is state control. So at the state level, decisions about education and schooling revolve around curriculum decisions, teacher certification, funding, you name it. One example of the complicated nature of the relationship between states and the federal government is the Common Core, which Spring brings up in his book. So the Common Core is a set of math and English language arts standards that say what a child should be able to do by the end of each grade. They're actually not content. The Common Core does not say that you have to read this book or study this thing, right? It's actually just a generalized set of standards. Many states prior to the Common Core had their own standards, but the Common Core is slightly more centralized. And 41 states have adopted the Common Core at this point and have implemented various assessments as an accountability mechanism. But people are very upset at what is perceived as the infringement upon states' rights through the adoption of the Common Core. And so we can talk about that a little more. Finally, we have family control, which Spring doesn't really talk about, but I am asking that you read the New York Times debate on a New Hampshire law that allows parents, well, that was in 2012, but that allowed parents to request alternative assignments if they didn't like what their children were being taught. And I think that the article brings up an interesting debate about control. So should schools expose children to ideas that their parents won't? Is that a fundamental purpose or responsibility? Or should parents themselves have complete control over what gets taught? And really what's at issue here is the line between private and public, which is a recurring theme that we've been thinking through in this course. For Wednesday, I would like you in your small groups, but you can do this independently, to do some research. And I do not mean anything strenuous. I mean like Google some stuff, look in the textbook, be prepared to share some ideas about the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top, Every Student Succeeds Act, and the Common Core state standards. I look forward to talking with you all Wednesday, and I hope you're doing well. Have a great week.